Get ready for an eye-opening journey into the world of parenting emotionally intense children. In this episode of the Water Prairie Chronicles, I'm speaking with Anouk Brière-Godbout, an expert in supporting parents dealing with the challenges of emotionally intense kids. Whether you're a parent seeking guidance or just curious about this topic, stay tuned for a conversation that will transform your perspective on the power of emotions in children. Anouk, welcome to Water Prairie.
Thank you for having me, Tonya.
This season, we've been playing a game called Two Truths and a Lie, and each of my guests, I've been asking them to bring in 3 facts, and Anouk has agreed to play the game with us today. So listeners, you're going to listen to her 3 facts and try to decide which one is not true. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can write in the comments, or if you're listening to the podcast, you can go to our Twitter feed or our Instagram feed and answer on the picture that you find there. And a week after we release this, we'll come back and give you the right answer. But Anouk, what are your 3 facts that you brought to share with us?
Yes. So the first one is that I started my first business at 15 years old. Second one is that I worked nonstop for 20 hours. No bathroom break, no anything, not even a glass of water. And the third one is that I drove for 5 hours with a sprained ankle before cruise control was a thing.
Wow. All right, so listeners, you know what to do. Listen to the podcast first and then go in and leave your answer. You might get a little tip in here. You never know. Sometimes my guests give some clues as they're answering our other questions. Welcome to the Water Prairie Chronicles, a podcast created to encourage and support parents of special needs children. I'm Tonya and I'm glad you're here. So today we're going to be talking about a topic we haven't talked about before, and it is parenting emotionally intense kids. And so a lot of our listeners may have a child that has a diagnosis that this kind of makes sense, why they seem to be a little bit tightly wound. And then others may just have a child that just is pretty intense in their personality. So listeners, whether you are a parent of a child with a disability, you may relate to what we're talking about today, or know someone who would benefit from this. So if you're listening to it and you know someone else, please share this with them. But to kind of get us connected and to know what we're really talking about, Anouk, can you describe what an emotionally intense child might look like?
I would say there's many profile that they can have. In general, they will react more intensely than the normal kid will be. And I'm using a quote for your listeners, because normal is not a word that I'm really thinking exists, but I would say it's kids that will be more reactive in some ways. I think we see mainly 2 profile. One that is probably the child that you're gonna get phone call from daycare or school like every day because something went on at school, and it's a child that is like that everywhere. And the other profile that is less obvious maybe sometimes is the one that is gonna you're never gonna get a call from school. They might not even know who your kid is in some settings, but at home you're getting that intensity much more. So it looks sometimes like crying. It can look like just meltdown. It can look like reacting very intensely to things that looks like nothing for us as parents. And if you have the profile that is like nobody else outside of your house sees, it's hard because nobody understands. They think you have the perfect child, but at home it's another child, and it can be very challenging because you feel it's your fault. And the child that is at home, at school, very challenging, then you're often blamed by school or daycare or people outside because you're not doing your job as parents, air quotes again. That's how people make you feel, and that's how we might feel too as parents of emotionally intense kids. Like everything is just more, you know.
So I know. So you've described at least one of my children already, even though my kids are older. But like I can remember having like at home with my son when he was young, especially feeling like we were always just going with just strong reactions to everything. And it wasn't always bad. It was just strong. We used to say that he wore his emotions on his sleeve because you
Yeah.
knew no one doubted how he felt at the time. But then the teachers would tell me that, no, he's always such a gentleman. He's always respectful. And so I had a counselor at the school once tell me that it actually was a good sign that
Yeah.
he showed those emotions to us, but could control them outside the home because it meant that he felt safe, that he felt that that was
Yes.
a safe place for him so that he could. And there were
Definitely.
times that I wondered, do I really want to make it that safe anymore? Because parents, it gets hard whenever you're
Yes.
having to battle with that.
Definitely. And that's very true. I think it's something that's very important to address is that they sometimes the school can say that we don't have that problem, so it's your problem.
Right,
And
right,
yeah, maybe, but the fact is that if that kids explode at home, it's because something is not going well, most probably at school or daycare. So
right.
it's not just your problem at home, but most of the time, it's since they don't have to deal with it, they won't help, which is challenging. They have to deal with it, they want to collaborate with you more. So yeah, I have like three kids and I have two that fits one category and one that fits the other category. So I've experienced it all.
Yep. Well, and I know before I had kids, and this is confession time here, I would judge other parents,
Sure.
because you'd be and I always think more like at the grocery store or at the out shopping at the checkout because it seems like that's always when they've
Yes.
they've been entertained when they were in the store and then they have to wait for mom to check out now, and you'd
And they
have
put
that.
all the candies and
Yeah.
like chocolate
Everything
bars
there,
there.
right?
Like they do
Candies,
it on
toys,
purpose.
everything.
Yes.
But they would, then you'd see the child that's like laying on the floor and they're screaming. And of course, my uneducated mind was, well, it's the parent must be doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And so you're right. I mean, I fully admit that I used to do that. And it's
Yes, me
so now
too.
whenever I see the same situation, it's like, mom, can I do anything to help you? Because I'm on the other side of it, so I
Yeah.
understand.
And sometimes just like a look of I get what you're going through
Yeah,
instead
exactly.
of a look of blame makes a huge difference.
It does. You aren't alone. It's
Yes, I get you. Like it's
right.
okay.
So one of the things you mentioned, the candy and all that. So one of the things that we did with our kids that seemed to work with both of them, especially when they were little. When they were older, they're easier to understand, like logic, so you can kind of help them
Mhm.
talk through some of those feelings. But when they were little and they just didn't understand anything, we would go whatever store we went into. We would go and we would find a friend at the store, and the friend might be a book, it might be a stuffed animal, it might be a ball. It'd be something that they could hold on to that lived at the store. And they got to spend their shopping time with that thing. Then they had to
That's a
say
good
goodbye
idea.
because it lived at the store.
That's a
And for
good
some
idea.
reason, with both the kids, it actually worked, and they would go back and look for that stuffed animal, whatever it was, and thankfully it was always there. It wasn't something that was ever sold, so
That might have created another problem.
it
I,
might
I
have.
also love like now I use my phone, but when my older ones were little, I didn't have a phone that took pictures. But I would always say we're gonna put that on your Christmas list or on your birthday
Oh yeah,
present list. So we
yep,
we are not like we're not never gonna get it. We will get it
right.
at some point. Of course, we're never gonna get everything you ask for because on one trip you might ask for like 15 things,
And
and
you're not
that's
going to
just
remember
one
what they were
time.
anyway. So,
No. My phone now is full of those photos, though. She could
oh really?
remember because of that. I should delete them. But
Yeah.
but that's another trick that sometimes helps in stores. But that happens like everywhere, and it will happen at home. And to the point you were saying, like kids will do this more to us. Um, I have one of my kid who was doing it on purpose. Like she needed to
Mm.
cry to let their emotions out at the end of the day when she started school. And she needed to cry, but she was not able to. Like she was not able to let
Mm.
it go. And so she would do things on purpose, knowing that I would be mad. So when I would get mad, she would be able to
Oh
cry, you know?
yeah.
And that was like, it was so obvious because she was doing things that she would never do otherwise. Like it was really that the point was that she would cry. I would make her cry. I was like, I'm not gonna, but you need
Wow.
to. How can we do that? So it can be very interesting to see that they need that release. It's a release of something, or it's an
Right.
overwhelm. It's not like it. And I would say that's the particularity of emotionally intense kids, is that they don't do it on purpose. And that's the thing that we need to remember as parents. They don't do that because they're bad kids. They do that because they cannot control it. And like giving consequences is just going to increase the reaction because they
Right.
don't control what's going on. And so it's often an overload of emotion, an overload of stimuli. Um, like lots of those kids might get at some point a diagnosis of neurodivergence. Being neurodivergent, it can be kids with anxiety, with different mental health issues, trauma. Like it can be a lot of things.
Right.
Of course, hypersensitive kids will be like that. Kids who have speech delay because they cannot express themselves at the
Yep.
level of their cognitive functions. So it's very frustrating. So there's lots of reasons why a child might have emotional intensity in their life. Um, and thus sometimes we just don't know, and sometimes there's many reasons, like it's not one reason, there can be many things, which is makes it very hard for the parent to find what's the cause.
Right. Well, I'm thinking through, when, we always talk about kids going through their terrible twos, and a lot of that's happening with, as you said, with the language.
Yeah.
They mentally, they know what they want now, but they don't have the tools yet to communicate. And
Mhm.
so they get frustrated. But then, so now you have a 5-year old who may be facing a similar challenge with, they may have the words, but they may not understand how to communicate that feeling yet of what they have. And now they're
Yeah.
tired, they've been overstimulated, that, so you're right. There's so many different things that could be there that, just thinking through where the triggers are. And I want to clarify too that when we're talking about emotionally intense kids, we're not talking about one child having a tantrum one day and then the rest of the time they're just kind of relaxed and all. But I think
No.
some of what we're going to talk about here could be applied in that situation for the parent
Yes,
to be able to
of course.
to learn from it, but have empathy for everyone else whenever that happens to you, so that this is one day and not day after day after day. But
No. No,
but yeah,
that's
but it's
in general, it's every day, many times a day. It can
yeah,
skip some days, but most of the time there will be some of it every day, probably more than once a day. Every kids
yeah,
will have a tantrum once in a while. That's just being
yeah.
kids, and even like
Adults
adults
have
have to,
yeah,
right?
right, right.
That's
We
just
just do
being
them
human.
different ways, but
Exactly. But sometimes it kind of look the same. So
yeah. So we have these kids, and we have the feelings of people maybe passing judgment on us, or not understanding, so we may not always have that support that's out there. What strategies can we use to help them as they're trying to figure out what their feelings are so that they can be healthy?
I would say there's two things, and we might address one after the other, but in general, it's regulation. So it's really is emotional regulation. As I was saying, it's not kids that do anything on purpose, they are losing it. Like they don't control what's happening for whatever reason. And so it's helping find, and I really call that detective work because it can be very hard to find. It's finding the triggers, the situation when it happens, and sometimes, like, often there's more than one thing, so it looks completely random. Like parents will say, I don't know what it is because it's all the time. And when you really start to look closely, it's not all the time, it's not all the situation. It's specific moments, specific triggers, but it can appear like it's all the time or that there's randomness in
Okay.
it because sometimes often there's more than one thing, like a child might be hungry and there might be too much noise, or they might have a fight with a friend in school, and you're not even aware that there was a fight in school,
Right.
and then they will just blow because you said no to a candy bar. But the cause is not the candy bar. The cause is everything else going on. And the candy bar is just like that little drop of oil on the fire, you know? So it just explode, but the candy bar is not even relevant. So trying to negotiate with the kids about the candy bar, it's losing our time because the
Right.
candy bar is not the real reason why the kid, like I was saying with my daughter, she was trying to make me mad, so she would cry. Like it's not often, it's not that on purpose. It's really rarely that on purpose, but that's what they're doing. Like they're just need the support and they're exploding because they need the support. They need us to help them regulate. So it's both detective work in what's triggering and what helps that kid calm down, because not every child will be calmed by
Right.
the same things. We were talking a bit before we went on, like on the air, about some kids need to be held and some needs to be left alone. Sometimes it can be a weighted blanket, it can be water, it can be like it. There's so many. It can be music, headphones. It can be a calm, dark room, or like it. For different kids, it's different things that will help them calm down. So it's finding both the cause and triggers, not necessarily a real cause, because yes, the cause might help if you know, for example, that you have a kid with autism. Like kids in the neurodivergent kids are classic, really emotional kids. If you know that, it might help you in your detective work to find the triggers, but you don't need the diagnosis to find the triggers. You just need to
Right.
like look at your kids and be very mindful and observant of that kid and what's happening in their life. And yes, you might not find them all because some might happen with somebody else and you just don't know. But the more you can find, the more you're aware of them, the more you'll it will help. But in the moment, giving consequences will just make things worse. So just really helping them to calm down and finding ways to help them regulate and not argue with them. Like it's pointless. You're gonna lose
Yeah.
your time. It's just gonna make like it's gonna escalate. And that brings me to the other things that is very important is staying calm, which like
Mm.
is not that easy. Like it's we hear that all the time. You don't yell at your kids and you stay calm, and like that's just bad advice because it's very hard to do. Like you
Right.
cannot just say to someone, "Stay calm." No,
Yeah.
no, just no. But that's the fact. We need to stay calm because when they are super intense like that, it's triggering for us. It's like
Yeah.
it even often trigger our fight or flight instinct because the noise can be very loud because they can be somewhat aggressive, sometimes really aggressive, and so it's hard to deal with. So we need to be super in control ourselves, and that's very hard, especially when we are tired or when we are hungry, when we
Right.
we
Right.
are overwhelmed. So that's the other part is we need to, and that's like the more dull answer of all, do self-care, but lots of self-regulating self-care to be able to stay calm in those moments.
There. So you're talking about the self care, like so. I'm thinking some of our parents have more than one child. You have three children,
Hmm.
so you were right because I'm picturing that fight or flight. You're going to escalate to that right away because now
Yeah.
you're trying to protect another child who may be in the room or witnessing that. So how can parents like care for themselves? Like how can they make sure that their own emotional well being is strong so that they're not adding to the storm that's happening there?
Yeah. And like, yeah, that's totally like having even one kid is hard to do self care. When you have a kid with special needs, it's extra hard to do self care. When we have more than one kid with special needs, I'm not even gonna say like it's almost impossible, but it's still essential. And so I think that what I like to say is that we need to reframe what self care means. Self care is not a weekend at the spa. Like
No,
that's not happening.
I don't even know what that is.
I have one plan with a friend at the end of the month. It's the first time in 15 years of motherhood.
Wow.
We'll see if it really
Wow.
happens, but I don't know what it is either. I never went. So
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, that's not self-care when you have kids, when you have multiple kids and when you have kids with special needs,
Right.
it's just not gonna happen. And so, and even seriously, like even if you went once a month, it's not gonna be enough. Like it's not
No.
gonna
No.
like it needs to be a constant thing. And that's what like self-care that is self-regulating is probably the thing I would go first. So like yoga, meditation, breath work. And even
Okay.
if breath work for you means taking one deep breath once an hour, like that's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
when your hour put an alarm clock on your phone, and every hour it's gonna ring, and you take a deep breath. Like even just that, it's self care. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So it doesn't have to be complicated. It
No,
could be simple.
yeah, and it's just like maybe you can drink like one warm sip of coffee and enjoying it. Like this is self-care when you have kids. How many? I don't know how many. Like it's a joke in my house that if I'm looking for my tea, it's probably in the microwave
Right.
because I'm reading my tea so many times. My kids, like
Yep.
when I'm looking for my tea, my kids are like, "Oh, you look in the microwave." Like it's yeah. So it can be just that, just like one sip, even if you can take your entire cup warm without reading it, like that's the summum of self-care. Like
I don't
that's,
think that's possible. I mean, even at my level right now, I've never done that.
I don't think I do, but unless I'm working, but I mean, those things, like just, it's like appreciating what we are already doing just a tiny bit more. And it's a practice, but just a tiny bit. Like just the deep breath. It just, okay, I'm here now in that moment doing what I'm doing. This is self care, even if it's just for 1 second
Okay.
or 3 seconds. And you practice it, and it gets like it. You can get up to 10 seconds at some point. And if you do that, I don't know how many hours you're up during 24,
Yeah,
18
that's
probably.
true.
If you do that like 18 times during your day, it's 18 times 5 seconds of self care you've done in your day. It's better than none, you know?
Right. Right. Well, I like that because a lot of times whenever I ask that question of people, I'm given like a more difficult process to follow.
Hmm.
This is a start, and then maybe that one breath can become two
Yeah.
as you're going.
Yeah. And
Excuse
maybe
me.
you can start yoga by doing one sun salutation that takes about 15 seconds and build up to 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and it's better
Right.
than none, you know? So it's just like, just this little bit, just doing that is better than nothing. And it builds up on itself. At some point, it gets easier. And the other part is doing it with our kids. Like, I
I
love
was going to ask
doing,
about that.
yeah, dance
Yep.
kitchen party. Like, that's my favorite go-to
Yep.
for healthcare with kids. Like, if I need an outlet and I need to like switch the energy, I'm gonna put music and do a dance kitchen party. Like, nobody's watching because nobody's watching, and it's my kids, even my teens, they're used to me dancing and like
Right.
um, and so yeah, like that can be. And for me, photography was one. Like I do photography, but documentary style. So I will follow my kids and take pictures and be interested in what they're doing while I take pictures. The pictures are my hobby, but I take care of them at the same time, and I'm interested in what they're doing.
Right.
So like it's finding things that we can do with them that doesn't take us away from it. Yes, that for example, photography, sometimes I'm going to do the dishes, they're going to do something fun, I'm going to grab my camera, take two pictures. It took me away from dishes for like a minute, and I'm going to go back. But also, they got 1 more minute of attention I would not have gotten them, you know? So it's a win-win.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I like that. So, are there like as we're as we're trying to connect emotionally with our kids, because I think that's a big piece of it as far as understanding what their emotion is or being able to convey what our emotions are without yelling at them. How can parents strike a balance between providing structure and routine but also allow room for their child's expression emotionally?
That's a hard one. I would say really depends. Some kids really need routine, so that it will be part of their triggers if there's not enough routine. So
Mm,
if that's
yeah.
what you're unveiling when you look at your kids and observing your kid, I would say that it's very important to try and put routines in place. And if you as a parent yourself is not a routine person, like lots of ADHD, for example, it might be a struggle, and that might be difficult for some parents to put routines in place. Um, and then at those point, I would say there's like You can have basic routines. You don't have to go like sometimes we like routines need to be this, and this at specific hours. And some kids really need that, like really need that, and they crave that. And the more unstructured and disorganized they are, the more routine they would need. Other kids, it's the opposite. Like, again, if you have an ADHD or as a kid, they might not need a routine. They might get bored very fast with a routine. And then it's the opposite. They need things to change up. And in the parenting world, routine is like that big thing that we absolutely need to put in place, and that it's good for everyone. And honestly, like I don't think any advice is good for everyone. Not every parent, not every kid. Like it's just not a thing. Um, there's no parenting advice that is good for every kind of family. And I really think it's tailoring those routines to the need of your family and the reality of your family. Like, for example, I'm a family who, like, my husband's always worked changing schedule. So some days he's there for the dinner time, some days he's not.
Oh,
And we
right.
only know that a few days ahead. So we need to change our routine every single day. And sometimes I'm busy and sometimes he's busy. Like, we don't have parents that work 9 to 5 and are always there at the same times. And quite frankly, that's not the reality of lots of families. Like think about all
Yeah.
the nurses, doctors, everybody who works in the
Oh,
like
right.
military and healthcare system, and lots of like a grocery store, and like there's lots of people who don't have that 9 to 5 classical schedule, and give keeping a consistent schedule might not be realistic for lots of families, much more than we are advertised. Yeah, like the typical family for me doesn't exist either, and the typical schedule. So it's finding a way to keep a routine somewhat in your life to the extent that your kids needs it, because yes, some kids really crave the routine, and then you'll have as a parent to do the extra effort if it's not natural, so that the kids can be regulated, because it might be dysregulating for them. But if your kids don't want a routine, then it can just be before going to bed, we need to brush teeth, take a
Yeah.
bath, and go to bed, actually, or read a book. But the kid can choose what order they want it in, because they need variety to keep things interesting. And so the routine is just we do those things, but not necessarily in the same order. As another kid, they would need to have bath time at 7:30 and book at
Right.
7:45 for 45, and then, because they need that. So it all depends on the kids. So the balance, I would say, depends on each family. There's no one right balance. I don't know if that
So
answers your question.
it does. It's it's something that as a family we've always struggled with because I'm not a routine person. It's I have 20 projects going on at any given time. I'm and there's it's why I love podcasting because there's enough projects just within this one that I can
Yes,
bounce from one to the
agree,
other.
agree.
But so it kind of so that's kind of how I was, and raising my kids, we didn't have dinner at the same time every night. But I like how you said that, even just having the structure of knowing that they're going to have a bath, they're going to have their teeth brushed. They did have dinner at some point. See,
Yes.
I've always felt guilty that I didn't have any type of structure, and I think both of them needed more structure than I could give them. But that's very freeing just to hear that, to know that there was some type of structure because there was expectation that all these things
Hmm.
would be done, and they were done
Hmm.
um, pretty much every night. it's,
Yeah, and
you know,
sometimes we skip the bath, and sometimes we skip teeth
right,
brushing. The teeth are not going to fall because you skip a night.
right, right.
Dentists
But
want you to try that. You think that, but it's not true.
when they were little, they would always climb into our bed, and we would read together, and we would do devotions together. So that was always the last thing before they went to bed. So there was some type of routine. It just wasn't like every day at 6 o'clock. This is what we're
Yeah.
doing. So
And
and I always
for
felt like
your
I was doing it
family,
wrong.
yeah, and for your family, like just the that can be the routine. There's something
Right.
before bed that is predictable. That's a routine.
Yeah.
Like we're told it should be all those like 15 steps, but not necessarily. That's the routine. But sometimes the routine makes just the fighting less. Some kids need more expectation, more clear, so they fight less.
The other thing that I was thinking of when you were answering that one was we're talking about watching your child, knowing your child. Would you recommend that a parent keep like a journal of what they're starting to see and to look for those patterns that way?
Yeah, I would say this. I did it mostly with photos. So I'm guessing
Oh,
I would say it depends on everyone, like what you prefer. I was not a big journaler. I am now. I do journal much more, but I was not that much. I started noting things down a little bit, but it became easier for me when I started doing photography. I was always taking pictures, but when I started doing it like every day, it became much easier for me to um, document those things and observe new things. But I would say it depends on every parent. That is really a parent thing. Like if you prefer pictures, go with pictures. If you prefer videos, go with video videos. If you prefer noting things down, go. But I would definitely recommend capturing it in some ways because our
right.
brains forget like so
Oh, yeah.
easily.
Well, because we end up having 2 or 3 days of peace and no outburst, and then we think, well, this is fine, and then it shows up again because it's probably going
Yeah.
to, but then we forget what the pattern was before, and
Yes. Yes.
because
And
the other
it's
thing I
hard
was
to see a
thinking too, yeah,
pattern, see if you don't note things down.
and I was thinking too that even if your child isn't diagnosed with a reason for being on an IEP at school, I don't. Is it the same in Canada as in the U.S.? We have the individualized education plan. What would you have in Canada?
No, we don't. It's not that clear. Some kids will have like a quotation, like a number associated with them if they have special needs, and then that will come with some type of support. But it's not all kids that has special need would that would they like for to have those like quotes like those number associated. It needs to be very specific criterias. So some kids
Okay.
will need some support, but they don't like get that. It's not as clear, I would say. I'm not super familiar with the IEP. I keep hearing about it, but I'm not really sure what it is.
Okay.
But yeah, I would say it's kind of difficult to like compare because it really like different. And here we have like special education class that are like kids will be regrouped based on their needs, but that would be for really high needs.
Right.
We will never see, for example, an ADHD kid with that. We will see autistic kids, but only if they have developmental delays in general, like so
Okay.
level 2, 3 autism, maybe never level one. Some schools are starting to have some classroom for level one autism, but it's really rare. Um, and so, in general, those kids should receive services in their classrooms, but it will be very. I, I worked a lot with with parents of kids with special needs, like different special needs, and when they were hesitant between like regular classroom and specialized classroom because their kids would um, qualify for specialized classroom, but the parents still ask their like it's the parents ultimately that who decides. I would always recommend that they go to the specialized one just before because there's not enough service. And so the ones that go
Okay.
in regular classroom that should get the service, they don't in general. I would
Okay.
also say this is specific to my province. It's really different. Like the school system is not the same here than it is in different provinces in Canada. So
Oh,
it really
really?
is, yeah. And I'm not like Quebec is very specific in their school system compared to the rest of Canada, and I'm not familiar with the rest of Canada's school system that
Okay.
much.
Yeah, because I've never asked that question to know, and I've had several guests on who live in Canada. We just haven't addressed that yet. Well, so what I was getting at is even if your child isn't on an education plan, you still know your child, and so if they're in public school, by keeping this journal or some type of documentation to figure out what that is, I would suggest having a conversation with your child's teacher to help them understand maybe what some of the triggers are,
For
because then
sure.
they could maybe help them, you know,
Hmm.
recognize before, like if they know something's going to happen in the way that class is transitioning and that it's going
Hmm.
to be more difficult for your child, then they would be more likely to maybe go over and stand near them during that time, or have a buddy assigned to them so that they, or maybe have them go in early or come in late if that would
Yes.
make it easier for them. And so if you know what those things are, I mean, I don't know many teachers who wouldn't work with you if you're trying to help make it a more peaceful
Hmm.
situation for the teacher as
Yeah.
well as for your child.
Yeah, for sure. But the thing is that sometimes the triggers are different in school and at home.
Right, right.
Um, so might help, might not. And often the trick that works at home to help the kids calm down don't work at school because it's not one on one. Like the possibility to be one on one is not the same, but
Right.
it can still help to share if the teacher's open. I sadly had experiences where the teacher's not that open to
Oh no.
the parents' feedback, and in high school, like I receive because we have like intervention plan that we call them. The kids can have that. Um, and I received one this year for my one of my child, and I was not consulted at all. Like nobody talked to me before they did that. They just
Oh
talked with my
wow.
daughter. So I was like, yeah, okay, might have been useful if I could have said something.
Right.
But that's high school. It's different than elementary school. I would have been I would have talked to the teacher at least. Not necessarily. Normally, the parents are supposed to be there when they do those plans. It doesn't always happen.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so there are some differences between the school systems in our countries too, which is
Yeah,
part of this too,
for
because
sure.
the because we do because in the U.S. we have the the IDEA policy, and we also have the Americans with Disabilities Act,
Hmm.
that protects some, and so and those were huge changes that happened, but there's still, I mean, even after 30 some years, it still needs to be improved. It's just,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
which
It's a
is why
long
we have
road.
these conversations, and why why we're trying to help give our parents as many tools as we can.
Yeah, and let's
But
be honest, like school teachers are not trained to support like kids that have special needs. It's not their fault. They just don't have the training, and
they don't,
often they
yeah,
have many kids with different needs in their class, and
right,
they don't even necessarily have diagnosis. They don't really know what's going on, and they don't have enough support from specialists to help them. So it's really not. I always like run it like most of the time. It's not on the teacher. It's on the
right,
system. The problem,
yeah,
like it really is. The like even the teacher who don't want to cooperate in general, it's because they're overwhelmed themselves. It's not because they're
yeah,
bad people. Right?
yeah. No,
Like it's
no, I
just
agree. Yeah.
they just add enough.
It's and unfortunately, a lot of our parents that are listening have had negative interactions with teachers, and
Yeah.
it's good to remind them that it's nothing personal on them, but
No.
there's a lot more in the picture than what we can
Hmm.
see, and I've passed blame before, as well. Sometimes it was warranted, sometimes it wasn't,
Yeah, well, I mean,
but
there's good
but
humans
that's for
everywhere
another
and there's bad
conversation.
humans everywhere.
So so talking about misunderstandings and all, with we've talked about with our ADHD kids, with our kids that are lacking executive functioning, with Down syndrome. I've asked this question of a lot of different, and I wanted to ask you too.
Hmm.
Are there any common misconceptions about emotionally intense kids, and thinking too, not just Joey, who has no disabilities and no learning disabilities or anything, who also is emotionally intense, but
Hmm.
for our kids who have special needs as well. With that, are there any misconceptions that you've come across that you'd like to talk about?
I would say in general, it's that the kid is misbehaving. It's a kid that is not, and the parents is not doing their job correctly. It's the thing that we see the most, and that's the parent look at themselves that way often, and they might look at their kids that way often. That the kids is it's a misbehaving. It's not like I would say that's the most common thing. We expect that kid, and often it's intelligent kids, so we expect those kids to be able to collaborate, and they don't. And then, like we were saying about the grocery store
Right,
example, like people would judge a parent, they will judge the kid for not being like well raised, basically. And parents will just be overwhelmed and think that they are doing a bad job and they're failing in their parenting. And for that reason, um, it's not taught about a lot. Like parents won't share that with other parents because it's kind of shameful because it looks like you're not able to raise your kids basically.
right,
And if the kid has a diagnosis, it makes it a little bit more easy because you can explain. But if the kid doesn't have, might never, or just don't have it yet, it really is kind of shameful because you feel it's your fault and people makes you feel like it's your fault. So I would say that's the misconception that we see the most.
what I'm thinking too, that even with like our preteen and our teenage girls, I know I've heard, like, not in school, but in like outside groups, like clubs and stuff, the adults working with it saying, well, she's just overly dramatic. She's trying to get
Hmm.
extra attention.
Hmm.
And I think that can be a misunderstanding too, that,
Definitely.
this is someone who's either not able to regulate those emotions, or like you're saying with your daughter, she's trying to figure out how to do it and she can't do it herself.
Hmm.
So she
Yeah,
needs that
and
that extra.
yeah, and or the classic like the whiny kids who always want a band-aid or things like
Right,
that because they're too like sensitive kids. This is a classic too. Like most often in girls, but it will be seen in any kids. And if it's a boy, it's going to be even worse because it's like that misconception that boys don't
right.
cry still is
Yeah,
very hard in our society. So kids that whine a lot and is like crying at every little bump, but it's hard for them. Like they're really hurt physically, or it might be scary. Like some kids are just scared, and we tend to say, "Oh, you just like you were scared. That's nothing." But it's not nothing. Being scared is a real thing,
for
and
that.
sometimes
Yeah,
being
it
scared is
is.
much worse than the hurt that like you hurt your knee, but there's nothing. You were more scared than the actual thing happening to your knee, but the scare you had was real, and it when you're extremely sensitive, that scare is worse than the physical
Right.
pain.
Yeah. So I was one of those kids, excuse me. I was one of those kids that was very shy. So I was quiet. I didn't talk a lot, especially outside of the house. But I would cry easily. And
Hmm.
so I would aggravate a lot of people
Yeah.
because but I was that emotional one. And so I learned that you waited until later to show your emotion when you're
Yes.
away from everyone.
Yes. I was that kid too.
Yeah. So I think a lot of our parents that are listening can think back to their childhood. Emotions are strong. We remember those emotions from when we were
Hmm.
young, and it's part of growing up. And I say this at different times. I picture our children as being these little bodies that are holding adult emotions inside of them. And so they're tightly packaged in there. And whenever they have emotions, they just kind of explode because it's too much for that little body to hold.
Yes.
And so I never like to belittle an emotion because they're very strong. We do feel them, and
Yes.
like I said, we remember them for years.
Yes. And it's often like we dismiss those emotions. We dismiss as not important or like too
Right,
much because we see like a child that will do like an entire drama because the plate is not the right color. It looks
right,
completely silly as a parent, but it's a real struggle inside that child. This child is really living it, and I know like the struggle of getting out the door. Like we were talking about routine. Sometimes it's like finding the balance
the
between that.
shoes,
Yeah, the where's the shoes are, and like I have like the socks that are not
the wrong
like
socks.
the wrong socks or like that little seam on the socks
Yes,
that is not the
those
right
are the wrong
brand.
socks, is what I'm talking about.
Yes. And so sometimes it can be a struggle, but also like often it's thinking outside the box. Like for example, one of my child was always late because getting dressed in the morning was a nightmare. We started dressing her in the evening, so she would sleep dressed.
Oh
We
yeah,
saved 25 minutes every morning that way.
right.
And it sounds weird, like you say to
That's
people that
smart
were
though.
like lots of people were like they were looking at me like I was crazy when I was saying that, or they looked like me when I was a genius. It depends. If they had the same struggle as I had, they were looking at me as a genius.
Yeah, that's
But
it.
most parents were like, "Your kids sleep like dressed." I'm like, you know what?
She was clean. The clothes were clean. It was
Leggings and a t-shirt or a PJ, what's the difference?
right,
Let's
right,
be honest. Yeah, it's the same. So like finding those solution also can be very helpful when you have intense kids that can like make you lose lots of time in moments that you don't have the time.
right,
Like,
right.
and knowing also like those 2 to 4, 5 years old who wants to do everything by themselves, but it takes forever. If you know your kids absolutely need to tie their own shoe, even if they cannot, and it will end up in a meltdown, then plan 25 minutes to put on shoes. Don't expect that to
Right.
take 2 minutes because it's not gonna. That's how
Yep.
planning and knowing what are the triggers will help you. Like right now, my youngest is on her tying my own belt in the car seat, but she's not quite able to, and she will get really frustrated. And sometimes it takes like 7 minutes to tie the belt in the car.
Right.
it can be very aggravating if you're late somewhere. And just like explaining that, like sometimes like today we don't have the time, like we will have time later. Might work, might not, but
Right.
it can be
Right.
helpful.
You can do it twice whenever I pick you up. So
For example, or like you do
you
F,
still
I
get your
do F.
practice.
Yes, you
Right.
do F, I do F, and we can do when once we're home tonight. You can do 10 times if you want.
Right.
We
Right.
can even take the car seat out of the car, and you can do it
Yeah, you
as
can do it at
many
home.
times as you want. So
You
it's
can
just
sit at the dinner table with your car seat.
I don't care.
Buckle in.
Just like thinking outside the box to find solution that might
Right.
help is very helpful in those moments. Yeah.
Yep. Well, no, this has been very interesting. If our parents want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
I would say probably my website. It's familymoments.ca because I'm in Canada. Or I also have a podcast, which is Parenting the Intensity. Um, so it's probably the best way. I have an Instagram account for the podcast also. So it's probably the best way to find me. I also have like free resources for self-care, ways to find them, like to help find ways to do self-care the way I was
Oh,
talking
good.
earlier. And a course, a free course also for like starting to parent your emotionally intense kids more easily, like the first steps. A bit like I was talking, like finding those triggers and things like that. So if your listeners want more information, they can get that on my website, both the podcast and the main website.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll put the links for all of that in the show notes too, so that they can find that. What other? So tell me just a little bit what you're doing on the podcast and on the website too, and if there's any special projects that you have going on right now.
The podcast is a new podcast. It started early January, not July, sorry. So it's just started. Right now I'm doing solo episode talking about lots of things that we touched on today and different things too. I'm planning to get guests in the fall, probably, and hopefully I'm gonna have you on.
I'd love to come.
I will also like right now I'll do mostly one-on-one support, but I'm gonna launch a membership probably in November to support
Good.
people in a group setting because I really love supporting people in group, and I think a big part because that is kind of a shame people don't talk about and don't have other parents to relate to, but there's lots of other parents out there that are living through that. So I think it's very important that we realize we're not alone. So I want to do that in a group setting, and I'm planning a summit but not really. I'm not quite sure of the format yet. Probably a retreat or something online for parents of emotionally intense kids to both do self care because it's really important, and also find ways to like clues in the detective works.
Nice, nice. Well, that all sounds really exciting. So we'll again, if you're listening, check the show notes or the description in the video for her links and check out what she's doing. She does some great posts on Instagram and on her website as well. So you want to plug into all that, and be sure to listen to her podcast too. So Anouk, thank you for spending some time today talking about this. I think it's a great topic for us to bring in and to bring to light because, as you say, a lot of parents aren't feeling like they have support out there. They're by themselves, and there's a whole world of people out there that understand exactly what they're going through.
Yes.
So thank you for joining me and for sharing this with us.
Thank you for having me. It was very a pleasure to talk to you and learn to know you better also.
Thanks.
I hope you've learned a little more about the misconceptions and coping strategies in the world of emotionally intense kids. If you want to stay informed about more episodes that help encourage and support special needs parents, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Plus, for a direct line to exclusive updates and content, sign up for our newsletter at waterprairie.com/newsletter. Thanks for joining us today, and I'll see you next week.